In this video, we will be discussing integers and absolute value. And before we get started, let's talk about some definitions. Integers are the set of numbers and their opposites, so that would include the positive numbers and the negative numbers. The positive integers are the numbers that are greater than 0, and they're located to the right of 0 on a number line. The negative integers are the integers that are less than 0, and they're located to the left. And the way that I always remember it is left is less on the number line. It rhymes. Left is less, so the further left a number is, the less it is. Opposite integers are two numbers that are equal distance from 0 on the number line, so that would be like 3 and negative 3. They're opposites of each other. And then the last definition is absolute value. It's the distance from 0 on a number line. And because it's a distance and you can measure it with a ruler, it has to be positive. Even if you're going negative, it still is a distance, so it has to be positive. You're going somewhere. All right, so let's talk about the different ways we can write integers. Now, when you're writing a positive integer, that's an integer that you've always used since elementary school, like 3 or 4 or 5 or 9 or 27. You've never seen with it written with a plus sign in front of it. You just write the number 27 or you write the number 3. And that's considered that positive version of that number, so that's like positive 2. Now, with a negative though, you have to put that little minus sign in front of it to show that it's negative. And you don't have to put a plus sign in front of it for positive, but you do have to put a minus sign in front of it for negative. Now 0 is like a tricky number. It's kind of like the fulcrum of the scale. So 0 falls right in between all the positives and all the negatives. So 0 is not positive and it's not negative. It's kind of just like the balance point of where the number lines meet up. All right, so it says using the integers to represent situations. So 6 feet below sea level, and sea level is 0. And the way I remember sea level is I like to draw a little cliff here. So here's my cliff. I'm not the best drawer. And I have the ocean. And in the ocean there's fish. And in the sky there's birds. And if I were to draw a number line on the side here, where the sea meets the cliff, that's 0. Anything above sea level is where the positive numbers are. So that'd be like 1, 2, and 3. Anything below sea level would be negative 1, 2, or 3. And that's why when you talk about locations, you hear that Mount Everest is so many thousand feet above sea level. Well, because it's above where that ocean meets the continents line. So that's why it's positive. Whereas the Marianas Trench, which is super deep down into the Earth's crust, they say it's so many feet below sea level. It's underneath where that water line meets the continents. So that's why it's below sea level, or it's negative. So 6 feet below 0 is going to be negative 6. A drop or loss of 3 degrees is going to be negative 3. And I owe $4 to the cafeteria would be negative 4. A temperature rose 7 degrees would be positive 7, but we don't put a plus sign, we just write 7. 500 feet above sea level would be just 500. And a gain of 16 would just be positive 16. So what I want you to do is pause the video real quick. I want you to do numbers 1 through 6 on your own. Unpause the video when you're ready. So withdrawal would be negative 10. A loss of 30 would be negative 30. Above sea level would just be 1,820. 14-foot drop would be negative 14. Sea level is 0. And a deposit is positive 150. And if you want to go back, you can highlight those key words. So withdrawal, loss, above sea level, drop, sea level, and then deposit. Withdraw is a negative word, and a lot of people will forget that one, whereas deposit is a positive word. Okay, so let's look down here at the bottom. So use the number line to compare and order integers. So this is what I recommend you do. If you want to draw your own number line, I highly recommend that. Remember, 0 goes in the middle, and then you count. The positives go up, so 1, 2, 3, but when you do the negatives, they go down in the opposite direction. So negative 1, negative 2, negative 3. Negative 3 should still be the farthest number from 0. So the lesser number is always located to the left of the greater number. So if we look at number 1, and I'm going to put number 4 on here to help us with this one. Negative 4 is here, negative 3 is here. So negative 4 is less than negative 3. And then I could do the same thing. Negative 3 and negative 3 are both in the same location, so they are equal to each other. All right. Now let's if we look real quick at number 6. I don't know if you remember what this symbol means. This symbol means absolute value. Absolute value is the distance from 0. So the absolute value of negative 7 is 7 spaces away from 0. So these actually turn out to be equal to each other. So I want you to pause the video here, do 5, 2, 4, and 7 on your own. So this one, 1 is greater, 2 is greater, positive 2 is greater, and if we order them from least to greatest, it would be negative 3, negative 2, negative 1, 0, 7, and 10. And I always like to go back. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 numbers and recount 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I didn't miss one. If we jump to our last page, which is page 4, absolute value is neither positive nor negative, and an integer and its opposite have the same distance from 0. So that's like 3 and negative 3 will have the same absolute value because they're both 3 spaces away from 0. So if we look at this example, the number negative 5 and 5 are the same distance from 0, but on opposite sides. But they both have an absolute value of 5 because they're both 5 spaces away. So if you ever got a question, which numbers have the absolute value of 5, well, you could say 5 and negative 5 because they're both 5 spaces away. If we look down at the absolute value in that little scroll there, absolute value of an integer is the distance from 0, and we've talked about that, and distance, because you're actually going somewhere, is always going to be positive. So if we look at that example, and it's always in those little touchdown bars, straight up and down, no, they're not curved. It says the absolute value of 19 is the same as the absolute value of negative 19, which still equals 19 because they're all going to be 19 spaces away. So if we look at number 1, it says the absolute value of negative 8. That's just talking about how far away is 8 from 0. Negative 8 is 8 spaces away from 0, so the absolute value is 8. The absolute value of 5 is 5. The absolute value of 15 would be 15, and the absolute value of negative 13 would be 13. Now, if we look really quickly at the next page, I just want to walk you through how you're going to solve these. So when you solve these, you're going to find the absolute value first and then perform the operations. So for number 5, we have the absolute value of negative 22. Well, that's the distance it is. So that's 22 plus 9. So if you do 22 plus 9, that's going to give you 31 as your answer. So that's how you find these. Same thing with this one. Find the absolute value of 10, which is 10, minus the absolute value of negative 4, which is 4. 10 minus 4 is 6. Now when you come down here to these ones, or to ones like number 9 and 10, you need to add them or subtract them or do whatever operation is first. So like number 9, 7 minus 3 is 4, and it's still in absolute values. Then you do the absolute value of 4 is 4, plus 4 plus 6 is 10 in absolute value, and then the absolute value of 10 is 10. And then 4 plus 10 ends up being 14. So if you need some help on those ones, that's how you solve those when you get to that practice on your own.